This clip was translated using Google because my English is not sufficient. Listed here is the minimum I need to tell about the subject to make the crime clear. There are many things that occurred during the trials that all showed coordinated planned child abduction. In this case, Germany organized and carried out a terrible crime and had every means at its disposal to do so. Only with a lot of effort and patience could I gradually find out that the state had kidnapped my child. I had legal protection insurance. But it did not cover this case because it was a family matter. But I should seek advice from lawyers. I spoke to more than 20 lawyers and was aware of my rights. One day I was notified by phone from the after-school care center that my son from the school next door had not arrived there. I went there immediately and notified the police. It wasn't until the evening that the police informed me that my son was in the women's shelter with his mother. The mother was not in Germany at the time. She had returned to Germany without us knowing about it. The next day I spoke to a specialist lawyer and instructed him to quickly return my kidnapped son. I spoke to the lawyer once the next day. He said he wanted to ask the name of the woman's lawyer first, even though it wasn't necessary. At the first conversation he told me that by law the court had to come to the hearing within 2 weeks and advised me not to report the mother. After that I could no longer speak to the lawyer. He was no longer available and I received nothing about his work regarding my son. It took a very long time until one day, after calling several times and desperately wanting to speak to the lawyer, I realized that I was being taken for a ride. I then went there myself. I couldn't speak to the lawyer, but he finally took action. We went to court 2.5 months later instead of just 2 weeks. On the first day of the trial, the mother stated that she had been to several offices and named them all of which were known to the judge. I didn't know anything about it. I sent her to language courses and wondered why she still hasn't learned the language after many language courses. I demonstrated many abuses of the child by the mother, all of which were documented, and the mother also admitted it. For a while that she would cut his genitals, which caused significant psychological problems for our son, and she also admitted it. Even when I was in kindergarten, I observed significant problems between our son and his mother. I immediately hired childcare for the afternoons until I got home from work. The mother chased away 4 caregivers within 2 months. After that, I took more intensive care of our son. One time I didn't have to go to work because of the economic collapse. During this time I took care of everything for my son. I had to go back to work after 2 months. After a few days, our son's teacher noted in the notebook that my son was very unfocused this week and couldn't work and asked what had happened to him. The mother admitted everything in court. Unexpectedly, the court decided that my child had to stay in the women's shelter. Women's shelter is for beaten and vulnerable women and not for kidnapped children. There was never any violence in our household. In the end I had to leave the court. I don't know what was discussed there. The representative from the Youth Welfare Office came out after a few minutes and told me that she would make an appointment for me to see my child and I would receive the letter within 2 days at the latest. The officer didn't answer and I never received the letter. I didn't know where the Youth Welfare Office was and where this woman was sitting. I searched the internet and went to the Youth Welfare Office. She immediately made an appointment for me and told me that she would be going on vacation afterwards. Which was none of my business and I wasn't interested in it. That day I was called by the Youth Welfare Office and told me that the officer was sick and the appointment was cancelled. There was also no representative. I should get in touch after 2 weeks, when the officer has returned from vacation. I could reach the official personally after 20 days. She told me that someone else is now in charge and she will forward the file. I should only contact him after 2 weeks. I could only reach him after 3 weeks. He didn't make me an appointment and insisted on a personal conversation first and gave me an appointment in 3 weeks later. After the conversation, a contact appointment was made a month later. I went to the appointment. He showed me the room where the meeting was to take place. He went to a colleague and I waited. He came out at some point. The agreed time had passed and my son wasn't there yet. I pointed out to him that my son wasn't there yet. He said that the mother called and said that my son didn't want to come. I told him that I was standing in front of the open door the whole time. The phone didn't ring and he didn't have a phone call and he was talking to his colleague the whole time. He said she called ahead. My son wasn't ordered. I was being led around by the nose. On the first day of the trial, the court ordered a lawyer to act as legal counsel for my minor son, who was supposed to defend the rights of my minor son. The guardian ad litem has stated in all of her letters to the court that my son is doing very well. He is well and happy and does not want to see his father. My expensive lawyer obviously didn't work for me. I looked for another lawyer. The lawyer said because of her fee that she works according to the lawyer's fee and showed me a table and marked the corresponding rows. I took all the documents, including my son's school documents, for the interview. The lawyer was of the opinion that, based on these documents, it was impossible for the child to remain in the women's shelter and requested the file from the court. After looking at the files, she told me that she had to speak to the judge. After the conversation with Richter, she demanded 7 times the fee from me, even though she had already signed the contract. I forcibly approved 3.5 times that amount. After a while, without any further hearing, the court decided that my son had to stay with his mother and away from his surroundings. The court stated in its judgment that the court was surprised that I immediately called the police but only hired a lawyer 2 months later. The power of attorney was dated and the judge could see it. I complained and told the court that the power of attorney was dated and the lawyer delayed it and it went to the next instance. The lawyer demanded astronomical fees and so I looked for and hired a new lawyer. There was a new court hearing. My son's lawyer said that she is in contact with my son's teachers and they are all happy with my son and he is doing very well. The Youth Welfare Office representative supported her and told the same thing. My lawyer arranged for me to meet my son at short notice. There was no meeting. I have spoken to my lawyer several times. He said that the Youth Welfare Office prevented the meeting and that he could do nothing about it. After a few months I hired a lawyer and terminated him. This lawyer came from afar and each court hearing cost several €100 in addition to travel costs and expenses. After a few months, the court ordered a psychological report to keep me quiet for a while and delay the case further. After 3 months I received forms about my son's psychological therapy from a psychological center. I immediately investigated the matter and spoke to those responsible. I found out that my son was doing very badly mentally and physically, and the teacher had contacted the pediatrician and she had taken my son there. The pediatrician told me that since the mother cannot speak German, the teacher contacted her directly and she had not seen the child yet. I was told that my son has been referred for occupational therapy for difficulty concentrating, speech delay. He's always tired and he's lonely at school and he's failing all his subjects. I only found out about the situation because the teacher took action herself and the pediatrician only had my address and had forwarded it on. Otherwise I would have kept it hidden like everything else. I contacted our family friends, with whom I had not been in contact since my son was kidnapped, and asked them if and what they knew about my son. I passed everything on to my lawyer and called the witnesses. I was only able to get an appointment to speak with my son's teacher through my lawyer. The youth welfare officer came over and the teacher was not allowed to say anything. I called my lawyer and she argued with him and told him that it is my right to talk to the teacher alone about my son. But he stayed there. The teacher just said that my son was lonely at school and was failing in all his subjects. My lawyer complained to the court and mentioned that our fundamental rights are constantly being ignored. We went to court. At the beginning of the trial, my lawyer gave me and the judge her letter, which is what I actually had. I later found out that she had deleted some things from the letter. During the court hearing, I learned that my son had been in hospital for neurological treatment and had to endure a lot of psychological therapy and a lot of abuse from his mother. Everything was recorded by the judge. Everything was removed from the hearing transcript that my lawyer received. My lawyer complained, but it had no effect. The psychological assessment report was handed over to the lawyers after a few months at a hearing to which I was not invited. I asked my lawyer to send me the report by email. I took vacation the next day and waited at home for an email from my lawyer. My son came to me in a dream that night and told me crying that he wanted to come home and they wouldn't let him. My mother also called and told me that my son, crying, told her in a dream that he loves his father and wants to go home but they won't let him. I wrote an email to my lawyer and told her that my child was in a very bad situation and that she should stop this abuse. After an hour I was visited by 2 police officers. One police officer sat in the living room and talked to me. The second one walked around the rooms the whole time and threatened me every now and then. I was worried that he was hiding something on me. After an hour, the police put a piece of paper on my table and asked me to sign it. I wanted to read it. They said I should read it later. I said I need to know what I'm signing. One of them hit my head with his fist, knocking my head against the table and threateningly forced me to sign the piece of paper. I leave the note after the police officers left. The note said that I had threatened to shed blood if the psychological report did not go my way and that I was not allowed to come within 100 meters of my son. I couldn't imagine how they came up with the idea. In the report, the teacher said that he was feeling very bad physically and mentally all the time, and she even contacted the pediatrician because the mother didn't understand German. An acquaintance said that my son idolized his father and he had not spoken for a year after his kidnapping and only answered yes/no, and it was clear that he had been intimidated. Staff at the women's shelter said he had stomach problems for several days and was constantly vomiting and crying. It was made clear that the mother was seduced into cheating during the marriage after psychological therapy by a psychologist, a civil servant. The teacher from the time of the kidnapping said that my son always talked about his experiences with his father. The report stated that I immediately notified the police and only hired a lawyer after 2 months. I complained about it, but my lawyer refused to mention it in her statement regarding the report, saying that my lawyer at the time had mentioned it. I wanted to defend myself on some issues, but the court had ordered that I hire a lawyer, who illegally spoke out against the law against my rights. I no longer know what happened to my son. The Youth Welfare Office prevented everything. My son was a lively child and one of the best in the class. He was intimidated, bullied, tortured and reduced from high standards of living to lowest standards of living. I was constantly defamed and people tried to pin something on me several times. Each time I had to prove that it was a lie. My lawyer has said several times that there is nothing about our case that complies with German law, but she has not taken any legal action against it. Everything was stolen from us. No one could read a book to my son in the evenings or help him with school supplies anymore. We have no relatives in Germany and are defenseless against the state. Everything was exposed and the court could no longer save face and obviously acted arbitrarily. Every effort was made to silence me through threats and financial pressure. All court hearings were staged shows. Everyone involved worked unscrupulously and in a coordinated manner against an underage child and me. Youth Welfare Office peeped. Legal counsel peeped. The lawyers worked against the client and the judge ordered exploitation and manipulated the protocol. Statements from the class teacher and others prove that everything was a lie. The mother was worked over for years and only had to do what she was told. All school and medical documents prove this. The question is what was promised to the mother. If I hadn't received the letter from the psychological center and hadn't followed up on it quickly, the psychological reports would have been completely different. The welfare of the child had no importance like all other laws. We were married when we came to Germany, so according to the law, German courts are only allowed to process our family matter taking into account the country in which we were married. There are foreign lawyers here who have received licenses to work as legal counsel in a given city and are known to the courts. Germany cannot make land register entries in other countries. I just skimmed over the matter. There are a lot of things in between and after that I can't list, otherwise it would be too long and perhaps no longer be seen or heard. I had approximately €200,000 stolen and costs incurred and more than €300,000 in lost earnings. I would like to sue Germany in the USA and have great hope in the USA justice system.